All right. Hey, everybody. This is our next edition of the Proptech Genius Show. And this is the only time, well, I hope it's not the only time you're called a genius, Stefan, but you never know.
I,
But you're
I think it
called
is.
yeah, you're called a genius when you get on my show. So there you go. I flatter you. All sorts of flattery. You're a genius. It's awesome.
I'll take it.
Will you take it? All right, awesome. So I'm so excited. This is our first one. I've had a couple of other episodes with obviously founders, but now I get a developer, which is really cool. We get a different perspective on this show. And so I'm Amy Palvido. I'm a former developer. So we're just gonna geek out on real estate development. So this will be fun. And then, and you're in New York. So we were talking about it earlier. That's like brain damage to build in New York. But hey, you look like a sane person. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know how sane you are to build in New York, but
Vaguely. Yeah.
exactly.
I live here, so I kind of have no choice. I'll put it that way.
Oh, that's true. All right. So we're going to give you a second to kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll talk about your background. And then we'll talk just like what you're seeing and development side, and then kind of what you're thinking is the next needs for PropTech, or where are you thinking there's gaps, and there's lots of gaps, which I totally get. There's tons of gaps, but we can talk through that. So that's kind of the conversation, and then I'm sure I'll squirrel and talk about something else, and that's how I go. So this is how
No
this
problem.
rolls. So
All
there you
right.
go.
Sounds
So
good, Amy.
take it away. Tell us who you are and all the great things you've been doing.
Sure. So I'm Stefan Martinovic. I'm living here in the Hudson Valley, about 45 minutes north of Midtown Manhattan. Excuse me. And I kind of had a career through prop tech and real estate development over the last 15 years or so. Um, I started out after business school with a brief stint at the Pentagon before getting into real estate, and was working for a development company in Washington where we were developing a whole host of different opportunistic projects. And so our kind of crown jewel was the Parkside community in Northeast DC, which is a kind of neighborhood scale mixed use master plan community across from a metro station, so transit oriented. And we were building 1,500 residential units, 750,000 square feet of office, 75,000 of retail, townhouses, two schools, and a partridge in a pear tree. So
Oh my gosh.
I got to cut my teeth on that project, and then was also working at other things at different stages, namely a mixed use waterfront project in Alexandria, Virginia, and then a couple of upper upscale hotels as well. So I got a lot of exposure to all different sorts of asset classes, ground up, value
Mhm.
add, repositioning, you name it. And kind of in the course of that process, saw a lot of deficiencies in terms of how I was basically getting my hands on information to more effectively source investment opportunities and then underwrite them, as development projects. So I, you know, took to learning. I've always been kind of like good at using technology, but I hadn't had any direct hands-on expertise within, that industry. And I kind of just dove in with both feet. At the time I was 26 and, didn't have kids and other responsibilities to deal with.
Yeah.
But I launched a company with a co-founder and best friend of mine who was a city planner by background, and it's called Create. And basically what it was is, and this is back in 2011, mind you, so this was a Google Earth style 3D mapping platform, initially in Washington DC, that overlaid a lot of different data points relevant to folks in urban development and the built environment. So that is demographics, zoning, building volumes,
Yeah.
parcel data, ownership, market conditions, you name it.
Mhm.
All the things that someone such as myself would really be kind of hunting and pecking for across like, a dozen different places. Um, and pulling that together so it was easy to point, click, and identify new opportunities in a way where you could
Mhm.
gain confidence and making sure that you're spending your time effectively. So we had some success with that product. In DC we were We had about 10,000 user accounts that we were serving, and had anchor customers with a couple of the more experienced development, like regional development companies in the area, and also the city economic development agency as well. So we I built that business over the course of 5 years. Raised some venture capital, ended up
Mhm.
going through the Techstars Accelerator, moved to New York, met my now wife, and ended up leaving the company in 2016 after, unfortunately, a big transformative deal kind of fell apart at the 1 yard line, but
Oh,
live and learn. And
yeah.
moved on, and actually, given that I was in New York, actually had an opportunity to come in and run the multiple listing service and the revamp of release into the market. So at that time, there was a couple of years, I guess it was 2016, 2018. My clients were 14,000 New York City residential real estate agents working for all the big brokerage firms that about. So
Mhm.
we were convening. We were really under threat by Zillow and their New York platform Street Easy, and kind of the imposition of all these fees, which the brokerage community did not take too kindly to. Um, New York City was, at least primarily Manhattan and Brooklyn, was like one of the only markets, if not the only one, that like really didn't have a traditional multiple listing service, which
Really?
initiated as kind of that centralized clearinghouse of all residential market data for listings of residential sales and leases. Um, and so we kind of like revamp that system by building consensus around from all the different brokerage firms, and then
Mhm.
put together kind of a technical architecture and a administrative layer as well that sat on top of it, that allowed us to have better control over data quality, and then more importantly to build relationships to syndicate that data out to other listing platforms to encourage competition in the market. So that entailed, working with the heads of all the brokerage firms, and then building relationships with CoStar and Realtor.com and the New York Times and other groups that, benefit and leverage listing data content in order to populate those the portals. We also
Wow.
worked with a lot of startups who were trying to break into the market and were, also looking to take advantage of this data, which was a very valuable data set that was also free at the time, effectively
Mhm.
free. And as part of that, I teamed up with my colleague Ryan Baxter to help grow the real estate technology committee within, and this was at the Real Estate Board of New York, which is the preeminent trade association for both commercial and residential real estate in New York City, and a very powerful, lobby group as well. And so
Hmm.
we had, access to not only the residential community, but also like all of the major owner operators, developers, throughout the area. And, we would convene, back in 2016, there was the conversation around Proptech was really kind of just beginning. And
Mhm.
so we would convene, all these different folks like in the boardroom to kind of have a conversation around, what are some of the needs in the market, and then how can we help facilitate, um, an exploration between all of the owner operators who, were interested but weren't sure how quite to leverage and evaluate some of these tools, with the innovators and the companies that were actually developing kind of the next generation of solutions. And so, we would have pitch competitions and hackathons and all sorts of things like that, that and kind of brought those two sides together.
Yeah.
And at the end of my tenure there, I ended up getting recruited by one of our member organizations, which was Midwood Investment and Development, a 95-year-old real estate family office turned private equity asset manager. So, um, very successful, long track record of success across like a variety of property types, or in major markets around the country. So, we owned, I believe it was 2 million square feet across 140 properties. A lot of retail, a little bit of office, a little bit of multifamily, and getting more into the development world. Because it had historically been a family office, there was a longer time horizon, and there was an interest in kind of breaking into markets were, there was severe supply constraints, whether that be due to the regulatory environment or hair on a particular deal. And,
Mhm.
so we were active, in New York, well, all five boroughs in New York City, really, but New York, Boston, Philly, DC, Pittsburgh, and LA. And my role there basically was to support the institutionalization of the business by bringing a technology and data analytics oriented lens to our investment activities. So,
Interesting.
I kind of came in with a very, very loose mandate of help us figure out how to use all this stuff and then help us, build a tool that like is unique to
Yeah.
us that, can help us make more informed decisions. And so, I spent a few years doing that, kind of learning, what the nuances of their specific investment objectives were, and then all of the different heads of the various departments, construction, development,
Mhm.
leasing, to understand their, unique priorities, and then to identify data points that could help us reflect that in a model that, effectively kind of came together like a Netflix scoring algorithm. So what it, looked like was a software platform that we, developed and customized, that sat on top of, a bunch of different maps, basically. So initially heat maps for all the different asset types that we, were interested in, so that we could
Mhm.
like look at a map of the city and then kind of toggle between office development, et cetera, and then reshuffle, hundreds of different data points that would allow us to say, well, this is an A plus versus a D property. And it's not to say that we wouldn't take a look at a D property, but we'd have to get a really, really good deal on it. Um,
Mhm.
Ultimately, we were trying to find the best property and the best block and the best city. And, I was kind of, building those resources in order for us to be smarter, better, faster, more informed, not just to kind of gain confidence in our investment motion, but also to, assist in raising capital from other institutional partners to come into
Yeah, for
deals.
sure. Yeah.
So we built some really interesting stuff there. And I mean, market conditions more than anything really dictated the pace of our investment activity. So, we had this good stuff, but, we're still subject to interest rates and all those sorts of things. COVID being, kind of the big thing that really threw a wrench in a lot of our growth plans.
Mhm.
So in obviously like beginning of 2020, everyone kind of went into shock and then damage control mode. A lot of our properties were like high street urban retail, and so like that stuff was just getting absolutely clobbered.
Right.
We owned, a good concentration of stuff in Center City, Philadelphia, some of which was actually burned down in a riot. I mean, it
Oh
was,
my gosh.
a very challenging time.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of the things that I was doing, um, a lot of things I was doing that like were more growth oriented kind of took a back seat. Um, but throughout the course of my tenure there, I mean, I applied a lot of the expertise I had kind of from the startup world to identify. I really like looked at and evaluated like hundreds of different solutions, um, software, data sets, and everything in between,
Mhm.
business model innovations, and the things that like repeatedly came up as being of interest on the investment side, especially for our long-term viewpoint, were migration patterns and retail foot traffic.
Yeah.
And so uh, through that, I, kind of was led into this world of mobile location data and was a customer of, I want to say like four different companies, at the same time,
Mhm.
that had data sets or solutions that like would provide us insights, into those couple of areas that like just weren't previously available any other way. So,
So are you
Unicast is
talking
kind
like Placer
of,
AI and companies like that? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So Placer AI and Unicast and AirSage and Environics, there's, a handful of them.
Mhm.
Excuse me. And ultimately when our investment activities slowed down, you mentioned Placer. I was one of the first 10 customers of the company, and I think that now they're like 5,000 or
Gotcha.
something.
Yeah.
So, I had a background in product development, and of course I got to know the team. They were looking for product feedback, and
Yeah.
so kind of an opportunity presented itself to go and work for the company, which has been continuing to grow. And I joined them at the beginning of 2021, and really my role evolved into heading up all things product strategy and kind of
Mhm.
business development related to it. So I would effectively do the same thing that I was doing as a customer, saying, hey, yeah, this tool is cool. I'm using it for this, but it really needs to do this. And here's how I would suggest that you go do that. And coming inside the company, it went from making that suggestion and then letting someone else do it to having me, run it end to end and kind of execute. So, for instance, parcel data is an easy one. It's like, hey, our customers are using placer data to evaluate the performance of a mall. Well, who owns the mall? How big is the lot? How many parking spaces does it have, et cetera? What are the
Mhm.
taxes on it? And so, I know definitively where to get that data and have previously evaluated pretty much every vendor in the space. So it was easy for me to say, hey, go talk to this guy at this company. This is how they license it. This is how we should plug it in. This is how we should present it. Here's who's going to use it. Here's how we
Yeah.
should price it, all of those
Yeah.
things. So kind of that whole motion. And then, along the way, getting user feedback and input to validate a lot of our kind of product roadmap direction, and then helping support really a go to market as well, in terms
Mhm.
of like how I believed like it would be beneficial for us to actually deliver that solution to our customers.
And you did that for
So
who? I'm sorry, yeah, I
for
lost you.
for Placer,
Oh, you did
for
that for
Placer AI.
Pacer. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So
Yeah,
I joined I was, one of the first 10 customers. I was a
that's
Series A
cool.
angel investor. And then I joined the company when it was like 200 people. And by the time I left, it was, well over 600.
Yeah,
Um,
that's awesome.
and so, it had gotten to the point where it was, kind of growing into a different phase of the company life cycle. And, for, you know, reasons that relate to me wanting to kind of get my hands dirty more on early stage startup stuff.
Yeah.
I left and um was started to kind of all along the way I'd been kind of like working with all different sorts of other startups within the real estate space, investing, advising, all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went back to that, and then also joined a startup studio called 10110, which is prop tech focused, and an arm of American Family Insurance, like a big
Cool.
multi-line insurance carrier,
Yeah.
that had a big property and casualty business. So what they were looking to do was to really like evaluate and launch a variety of concepts relating to residential real estate primarily,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of taking it from idea all the way through delivery and execution, and then hopefully spinning that out once those projects had um, demonstrated a certain degree of traction.
Sure.
So I worked on a couple of pretty interesting projects there. My initial suggestion was to do um, kind of urban farming related stuff, which I'll come back to. But ultimately, uh, kind of made more headway with doing kind of more mobile app based data products for
Yeah.
residential real estate investors,
Mm-hmm.
which is another gap in the market that I see still existing.
Yep.
Um, and Unfortunately, they ended up winding that studio down for, I don't know, bureaucratic company reasons last
Mm-hmm.
fall. And I started teaching at that point. So I teach real estate entrepreneurship and innovation at NYU. I've got about a dozen students per semester that are, God forbid, listening to what it is I have to share, if that's to the extent that that's of value at all. Um,
Oh, come on.
yeah, so you know, I spend my time doing that, and then also, I have my own real estate investments as well. So I've kind of taken my foot off the gas on startup investing, just because like I've had plenty of exposure there, and I think I've been able to pick some winners like Cherry. I was a repeat
Oh,
customer and angel investor in as well, just as an example. But I primarily focus these days on a portfolio of three interrelated real estate projects.
yeah.
So And that,
LD is a hilarious dude. I'm just telling you, I've had a meeting with him. Oh my gosh. Talk about, I thought I was blunt. Oh my goodness. He will tell you how it is. And he
well,
does
he
not
is Israeli, so that comes with the territory.
care. Oh, it does. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just like, all right, tell me how you really feel, man.
Yeah,
Okay.
no,
Let's
he's
go.
a very sharp dude.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I got involved with them because I mean, look, when I had my own startup, years before that their company existed, I was like running into all sorts of issues relating to kind of connecting and federating all this data.
Oh
And
yeah.
had Cherry existed, my company would have had a totally different trajectory. I would have been a customer of theirs, a very happy
Mhm.
one, and been able to focus
Yep.
on things that were more value add for my purposes. But hey, live and
Mhm.
learn. Nonetheless, like I think they're doing some really mission critical, high value stuff, and
Yep.
excited to support them over the years.
Yep.
Um, and my focus now is really on, I mentioned this real estate portfolio, which is like heavily bent on sustainability in the intersection of development, agriculture, and hospitality as well. So
Yeah.
kind of the crown jewel of the three assets is a project up in the Catskill Mountains, which is about hour and 45 minutes from Manhattan.
Very
And
cool.
it's historically been it's just a really beautiful area. Nature, mountains, hiking,
Mhm.
skiing, fly
Mhm.
fishing, you name it. And it was, for those who don't know, it was really hit its heyday in the kind of the mid 20th century. There was these huge grand resorts with just hundreds and hundreds of rooms and ski hills and golf courses, and it was just a very impressive set of places. They called it the Borscht Belt,
Mhm.
and you know those uh those places really kind of had hit their peak mid-century, or kind of maybe let's say the 70s and 80s, and then started to decline as consumer preferences started to change and people went down
Yeah.
to Florida, and those places were showing their age. um and it kind of felt somewhat on hard times, but is undergoing a bit of a renaissance, because there's especially, it was pre-COVID but really accelerated with COVID, a lot of people coming out of New York City that are looking for something different, that wasn't like necessarily like going to the Hamptons or something,
Right.
that they could experience the outdoors, do it within driving distance, and then either have a day trip or stay the weekend, and experience kind of all that the area has to offer. It's very, if you draw a 3 hour radius around New York City, this is really the only area that's like that. The Hudson Valley and Catskills, where you have a lot of green space, and it's really beautiful. There's a lot going on.
That's great.
And so in 2020, in 2020, I mean, like, I was evaluating real estate markets for a living. So I saw the writing on the wall like very quickly. And
Mhm.
within the span of like a week and a half, um, got the house I'm in now under contract out in the suburbs, which I had not been considering before. And
Mhm.
also, started to move on. I'd been looking at property upstate for about a year, and then got, kind of saw the one, and then got that under contract, and I'm proceeding with it ever since. So what that project is it's a 117-acre site that is an old dairy farm that's been decommissioned for about 50 plus years. And so what we're doing is bringing it back to life through a mix of different innovative land use practices.
Yep.
So that is, building ultimately a hotel that's going to be somewhere between 65 and 80 rooms, with two restaurants, full service, and then kind of a more casual 3 meal restaurant. Um, and it's going to have a mix of kind of more traditional type hotel rooms, and then cabins, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms.
Very cool.
So kind of more of a, let's call it a permanent glamping type of
Mhm.
situation. And then a small residential component as well, where we'll have some really beautiful A-frames and homes built out of natural materials. And
Mhm.
this is all set on a revitalized 20-acre working regenerative organic farm. So we are deploying a lot of ecologically minded agricultural practices, which are kind of
Yeah.
in the zeitgeist right now, which is great, that are intended to sink carbon back into the ground, improve soil health, improve
Yeah.
drainage conditions and mitigate stormwater runoff, and which is a major issue in the town, um, and give people, really kind of a resort like experience where they can come and get their hands dirty. They can eat food that's grown on site, cooked by a tremendous chef, and, be able to bring their family and have, a wonderful weekend outdoors without even the need really to, to bring a car or, to, leave town. It's in the hamlet of Livingston Manor, which is in an 1,100 person town. So it's pretty small. It's got a 2 block
Mhm.
main street. But on that main street, and, thanks to foot traffic data for helping me identify this, the town has really kind of been just undergoing a tremendous transformation over the last 5 years or so. And so there is a great art museum there. There's a co-working space. There's cafes and restaurants, and, in addition to all of the, other great things that it has to offer, like breweries, et cetera. So, it's really, we believe we're kind of in the best site at the right place, the right time, and, building a product offering that like is largely missing in the market, but that like is in strong demand.
Mhm.
And, we believe that we can serve. So, um, we've been working closely over the last few years to kind of really, like, honestly learn a lot about agriculture and the kinds of practices that we need to bring to the table to make this a reality. Um, and be able to activate the site through some farm dinners and other events, to kind of help people engage with the land, because, in its current state, it's very beautiful. It's got its own set of ecological issues just through decades of neglect, but that's a lot of what we're trying to solve for, and then also to indicate to, the rest of the world and all of our guests, exactly like how some of these techniques can be used to actually leverage development as a tool to restore, our natural environments, and enhance those,
Yeah.
rather than destroy them.
For sure. So you
And
educate, it's like ecological. Yeah, yeah. So a lot of people don't know I'm a former organic farmer. So
there you go. So you know all
my
about
past,
this.
I know all about it. I know exactly what you're talking about. I had pasture raised animals. I had a
Hmm.
dairy cow. I had chickens. We had pasture raised eggs. I know all about the difficulties of organic farming. I truly know it because you get drift from neighboring fields and you can't really claim it's organic, and you have to start with the soil and how long it takes to get certified and blah da 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 da. Da.
Yeah.
Yes, I lived that in another life, and I
Yeah. So
tell you, but it's great
we're
and it's wonderful. Like if you can grow your own food, and people, the best thing is I used to tell people, if you want to know peace, know who your farmer is, because you
Mhm.
know where your food's coming from and you know what you're putting into your body, and you can truly, just, have a great meal and just like it was out just out there. It's great.
Right, exactly. So,
Yeah, for sure.
we're definitely, along that glide path, and, doing some rotational grazing, like light
Mhm.
animals as well, is
Yep.
definitely a big part of that. But, I went from dealing with like, I mentioned thousands of New York real estate brokers to like the USDA, and that was a pretty big change of pace and,
Mhm.
vocabulary that I had to learn. But,
Oh yeah.
fortunately, I came to learn that rural agriculture is a, fairly collaborative community, and there's a lot of
Mhm.
support and resources.
Mhm.
And, we kind of came into it with, really genuine and, best of intentions in order to like, pay respect to the land and to do what we can to use it to mitigate a lot of the ecological issues that are there now.
Yeah.
So, what we did is we drew on a lot of principles from, it's called conservation design and planning, where, in the residential context, if you were to, basically do a subdivision and you just plopped a bunch of houses down on 2 acre lots, it's a very inefficient use of land. And, what a conservation design approach is taking, let's say, the same number of units, putting them on much, much smaller lots, and then freeing up that land to put into conservation easements so that it, is reserved as permanent green space. Now, where the agricultural piece comes in is that we would conserve that land as green space and then use the green space to grow crops, right? So that's a big part of it. And so
Yeah.
there have been, a handful of other agricultural centric developments around the country, and by all accounts, they've done extremely well. But it's not exactly something that's like widespread.
Mm.
Golf course communities are kind of like the alternative, but golf courses are terrible for the environment. But they do get a premium, right? So like a lot of the research that's been done on the existing agricultural communities is very, very compelling to me.
Yeah.
Or from
Yeah.
the Urban Land Institute and otherwise. And so, we saw this as an opportunity to like, showcase this as an amenity and really the central kind of beating heart of the project. In addition to growing your own food and being able to showcase a lot of these sorts of things, and not just, agricultural techniques, but a lot of prop tech related technologies as well, particularly on the design and construction side, right? So, because if someone's going to be staying in a building that's built with natural materials in a, um, you know, new and more ecologically sensitive way, then that's a a good way to get exposure on some of these things. So that's been like this big project. We're talking about between everything on site plus like workforce housing, which we're going to be building in association with it. We're talking about a $60 million, investment. We were awarded $1 million grant from New York State because they like what we're doing in terms of furthering a lot of the region's economic development goals. Um, and it's a process. We're building a very, we're proposing to build something very large in a very small town that like has not really seen or dealt with any sort of proposal like this before. So, as much as we're educating ourselves around, um, the good that is inherent in a lot of these, the approach that we're doing, we have to educate everyone in the town as well. Like, what is regenerative agriculture? Why is it a net benefit, not a detractor? And,
Yeah.
allowing folks to get to know us so that, they understand that, our motives and intentions are pure.
Mhm.
Because I mean, setting us aside, I mean, a lot of other developers like, built a pretty negative reputation for themselves. And, this is a community that like has seen an influx of new people. And, we want to make sure that like we're doing right by, not only the environment, but the community as well. So,
Yeah.
um,
Are you facing resistance? Like most developers will face some of it from somebody, right? I mean, been there.
honestly, not really,
Well, that's
not
good.
like vocally that like, I've
Yeah.
seen. I would say that like we have faced some skepticism, because people just are kind of not really sure about this stuff and what we're saying.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of the justification for saying, hey, no, this is going to mitigate stormwater issues, not make them worse. I mean, it's buried in hundreds of pages of technical documentation that like is extremely difficult to understand, right? So,
Yeah.
I would say that we've been dealing more with that. We are not proposing to build a golf course. We are not proposing to clear cut lots of trees. We're not proposing to do any of that. So, we're building an eco community, yet we're still being asked to go through a pretty stringent environmental review process, which is uniform, no matter what you're building across New York State. What we're
Hmm.
doing, or a nuclear power plant. And well, that was a little bit of a surprise. Um, I think that we're learning a lot through that process and understanding how noise levels and light levels and all these things, like need to be considered, in the scope of this broader project. But everything is aligned. Um, the town stated objectives are, extremely closely aligned with everything that we're suggesting, and we're largely designing to their specifications, let's say. Um,
Are you
so
applying for any sort of conservation easements too, along with the development, or no? You're not going
I
there.
mean, we are, putting in our own like restrictive covenants,
Oh,
and deed
okay.
restrictions, on the
Yeah.
property as part of that. But there's, yeah, there's dozens of acres of, land that's concerned, that's in, that'll be put in conservation. There's miles of hiking trails. There is
Wow.
agricultural easements. There's all sorts of things
Yeah.
like that. Um, and, it's honestly like we have, to give you some context, we have, 117 acres.
Hmm.
We do have some wetlands on the property, and they're not natural wetlands, actually. It's that, there was springs coming out of the side of a hill that would be used to water cattle, down in the pastures. And when you have heavy cattle that trample clay-rich soils, it compacts it, and then you have springs running into them, it
Yeah.
creates like a lot of water that's just trapped there.
Yep.
And it like created these neglect driven man-made wetlands. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's unfortunate for just about, for everybody. But we have been, and now we're talking about, I don't know, a dozen acres or something. We've been able to design around every old growth forest, every wetland, like just about everything. And it's really, like letting the land speak to us and evaluating a lot of data, um, in an interactive way that allows us to understand what those constraints are and to then work around them.
Yeah. So if
So
we want to
yeah.
get back to prop tech, I mean, there's a whole like what you're building, there is no prop tech for really. I mean, there's some if you're talking about design use around eco, I don't know, is there? I mean, and maybe I just don't know if you're
Uh,
doing
there is and
eco
there isn't.
design for some of that stuff. Is there technology out there for it? I mean, I don't
So
know.
at the, kind of at the planning phase right now, there's not really something that's like purpose built, but I have a back, over a decade at this point in all sorts of geospatial technologies. So I'm building digital twin models of every project I do.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
that's using, you know, 3D rendering engines and getting
Right.
drone surveys and overlaying all
Right.
of our engineering documents. And I have something where it's like in a matter of seconds, I can go from like a phasing plan to a topography to
Right.
grading plans to soil
Right.
conditions to all this stuff. So like it's, a lot of field work to collect data. It's
Mm-hmm.
drilling wells and, getting
Mm-hmm.
flow rates back. And it's getting using public data and stuff that we're, sourcing and then putting that together in a model. That has been incredibly valuable. But
Yeah.
it's something that like, is using existing technical infrastructure and then going and like, massaging a lot of different, data
Mm-hmm.
sets and things like that on top of it to serve our purpose and to be a digital reflection of our project. So there is an extensive use of prop tech like in that regard. A lot of what I was doing before, was parcel data, site selection, that sort of thing. Well, we've selected a site already. So it's,
Yeah.
more of a matter of kind of understanding it in as much depth as possible
Mhm.
and having, our diligence be kind of like at the at our fingertips at all times, as opposed to like sifting through like just page after page of these huge surveys and site plan
Yeah.
documents on paper. And it's just very difficult to put those things together. So rather
Mhm.
than being reliant on consultants and stuff to like be able to answer questions for us and identify conflicts and anomalies, we have the ability to do it. I have the ability to do it largely myself, which has been proven to be extremely valuable. And that digital model helps us in many, many ways. So it helps us, in our planning purposes. It helps us in, showing to the community kind of what the project will look like and what these
Mhm.
conditions are and how they
Right.
interact with one another. It's helped us in, securing grant funding because people want to be able to see it. And, absent having like, you can show a handful of renderings, and I think that that's helpful to kind of paint a picture, but to be able to understand the interaction between all these different things is something that, this GIS site planning, approach is really very, very well suited to do, especially because, we're talking about a large site with a lot of varied conditions on it, really.
So does it help you with the water runoff issues? Can you identify where they're based on it does? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so I mean, we have, kind of like all of the drainage flows and
Yeah.
everything. It's all
That's
it's all
really
mapped in
cool.
there. So a lot of it is just like taking, you know, content that our engineers have produced and then like, putting it onto that map basically. So anytime that there's a new layer that they put in, around, grading plans, that kind of thing, it goes onto our map. And, it's, a persistent reference for us,
Yeah,
fortunately.
yeah, yeah. Because things change over time. Like you'll like, oh, we got this restriction now. We can't build this. We got to move this over here, or whatever it might be. And
Hmm.
then you have to remap everything because I have to move this building 5 feet this way, or
Hmm.
whatever it
Hmm.
might be. And then you're like, oh, but what is it? And then you have to. It seems like you start all over with your stupid. It's like, oh, shoot me in the face, right? So that's
For
cool.
me, it's generally, yeah,
Yeah.
no, like for me, it's kind of like updating a file and I can go in there and
Mhm.
I can kind of see a lot of this stuff like right
Yeah,
away. And
yeah, yeah,
if I
for
want to
sure.
like go and, I can use SketchUp, some of these like very
Yeah,
basic kind of 3D
yeah,
design tools, I can go and
yeah,
I can whip together something in my head on a building and then it's overlaid on the map on the site in
yeah. That's
like
nice.
minutes. It's you know, this is a skill that I've kind of like just happened that I've developed and applied in this context over my career. And I got to tell you, it's something that like is going to serve me extremely well, as I go
Mm-hmm.
forward and I pursue other projects later in my career.
Sure, for
So
sure.
yeah, that's the farm.
That's the
But
farm.
yeah, like we're talking about the farm grows food. Food is
Mm-hmm.
served generally in homes and restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're opening a restaurant as well, offsite.
Okay.
So I live in the town of Armonk. I think our claim to fame is that we're home to IBM's global headquarters here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an 11,000 person town, and Armonk's a 4,000 person hamlet, within that. And thanks to a bunch of location data and stuff, content from the postal service, um, key stat that I was able to pull out is that 1/3 of the town's population has turned over in the last 5 years,
Wow.
which I have never seen numbers like that before. And as a result, there's a lot of like young, a lot of the homes here were built in the 80s and 90s. And it's a very hilly area. And so it's not like stuff isn't cookie cutter. It's like kind of had to all be built,
Mm-hmm.
unique to those sites, which is one of the reasons why we like it so much. Um, but the folks that like, came up here in the 80s and 90s, built these homes, sent their kids to the good, schools here, which are great. They've, become empty nesters and have since moved out. And they were selling houses to folks like myself or young families that like are aiming to also send their young kids to these grade schools. So um, there's just been a massive influx of folks in their 30s and 40s, and there's just not really um, the restaurants, kind of just don't offer a lot of what the folks here are craving. Because myself, a lot of our other friends, we're coming from the city, we're coming from Brooklyn, and we're used to a level of kind of food and beverage and entertainment experience that just doesn't really exist here. And if it does, you got to drive like half an hour away.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my wife and I, just through a point of frustration, we kind of like, we were initially going to like flip a house, and then that didn't work out. And then I saw this other property. It's right in the middle of town. We drive by it 10 times a day. And I was curious about it one day, and I was like, what is the deal with this place? So
Mm-hmm.
I looked at it, and it was the same price as the house we were attempting to buy and flip. And
Mm-hmm.
I managed to convince her that we should open a restaurant, that we should buy it and build a restaurant and open one there.
Your wife
And
really loves you. I'm just saying,
she
because
does. Well, she's also an entrepreneur, and she
well, yeah,
also,
no, she gets
you
it.
know, yeah, she gets it. She likes restaurants, and lived in the village for over a decade, and so she gets it as well.
Yeah.
And us and all of our friends, like, we just like would constantly like, you know piss and moan about how like we wish there were better options, and there isn't. And so
Mm.
I kind of like, by the way, if you ever want to get your significant other to convince them to open a restaurant, start with the menu. Like, oh, we could have like steak
Oh,
night. We could
good
have,
to know.
this. We could have like this cool cocktail. And by the time we came up with the menu, we were just like so kind of like, oh my God, if like this could be real, like this would actually be awesome. And so, we just decided to do it. And we
It's,
were like, well, we'll figure it out. I mean, that's like kind of like what this game is like, just
mhm.
having some confidence that like you will be able to figure it out, because you certainly aren't going to know everything
Yeah,
at the onset.
yeah.
And we got the building under contract. We started to design it. We tried to figure out what sort of what would the aesthetic be, and how would it lay out, and how big would it be, and overlaid our ideas around on the menu on that.
Mm.
And all the while, we, knew that we needed a chef, because neither one of us can cook. And that's a little bit of the irony of it, is that like we like food and restaurants, but like
Yeah,
we're not chefs. Like
yeah.
we eat an unfortunate amount of like processed food out of our freezer, which our little kids
Yeah, that's okay.
don't exactly, yeah, they don't exactly help us with. But um, through that process, we had this beautiful restaurant, designed, and started to talk to chefs. And we met a local chef here who ran a successful restaurant that we used to go to regularly. And it had closed down very recently because like the building was falling apart. So I
Mm.
reached out and I said, hey, like this is what we're looking to do. Oh, and by the way, we have a 100-acre organic farm upstate that we're going to be growing our own stuff. We're going to have a hotel. We're going to have all these things. And she was just locked in. Like, so she
Ah,
was
that's
the
awesome.
sous chef at a place called Blue Hill at Stone Barns, which is like, 15 minutes away from here, which at one point was rated like the number one restaurant in the world. And, part
That's
of the, let's call it the shtick is that it's on its own regenerative organic farm. So she knows all about this stuff and totally got it immediately and and we got along great. And she's been, a tremendous partner for us really ever since. And is looking to have a hand in, a variety of these different ventures that we have that are, like I said, now kind of all related. So, having a restaurant where you can claim to grow your own food, tell people about the farm will have a hotel. Oh my gosh, you enjoyed your meal. Why don't you go stay there, try our other restaurant? And so that kind of like fits into the equation.
yeah,
Um,
sure. Yeah.
so like we sounded like it made sense. And so we've been pursuing that. And, we've been going through the only way I can put it is just a really brutal entitlement process to get this restaurant approved. Like, honestly, probably more difficult than this huge hotel project. And it's around like a handful of parking spaces in a town that, in my opinion, has no problems with parking inventory at all. But we have to still kind of work within the letter of the regulatory environment. And that's
Mhm.
been very, very challenging. So we've been doing that for over a year.
Oh,
Um,
oh, really?
I've been presenting a lot of data,
Oh my
as you might
gosh.
imagine, to
A
the planning board.
year, a
They've not
year.
been that fun.
Isn't it, so you're trying to get a variance or actually change the zoning?
I got a variance 6 months ago, and now I'm
Huh.
trying to get the planning board to bite on the fact that like we got the variance and that they should just
Hello?
approve us and like why continue delaying this.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, I'll set that off to the side here. My hope is that knock on wood, we'll have this thing approved on this Monday, after a long time. And yeah, I mean that project, there's once you get the approval, then you have to do all the other fun, really
I know.
hard stuff of like building and operating a restaurant. We haven't even like obviously got to the starting line, but it gives you an indication of just like how difficult it can be to do business. Around these parts, it's tough. The town has had a very widely known reputation for being very, very difficult to work with, and that is absolutely proven to be true. And this is a project that like has an overwhelming amount of support. Like everyone wants this place. We have 600 signatures, on a petition of support for the project in a town where there's only 1,700 households. Like if that gives you an
That's,
idea.
that's crazy.
So,
I know.
so
That's
yeah,
so odd that they would
it's
fight.
been frustrating, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, like, we will get it done, and it's gonna be great. Hopefully it'll open, about a year from now, because we
Mhm.
do have to do a full construction job on this thing. And
Mm. I want the first
so
table. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna show up in
you're
Armonk, New York, and I want the first table.
you're welcome to the grand opening,
Woo
Amy.
woo! All right. That's awesome. Very
Um,
cool.
Well, and as you might imagine, a restaurant also generates food waste. And our
Yes.
chef, Roxanne, previously opened and ran her own restaurant, which was a zero waste restaurant where she
Oh,
was,
good. Yeah.
doing whole animal utilization and,
Yep.
collecting food scraps for composting, right? And certainly we can use those food scraps as compost on our own organic farm, which,
Sure.
is pretty great.
Yeah.
But also through the course of my, Proptech network, I linked up with a company based in Queens that is using food scraps from restaurants to grow gourmet mushrooms in an urban farm. And I was like, wow, that is really cool. And then
Hmm.
I dug into the business and I was blown away by how good of a business this is. Other vertical farming stuff has like, had its share of issues, but
Hmm.
mushrooms are a very different um, technique. It's not using lots of light, not using lots of water. And your input, they're, basically getting paid to get your inputs from like wood chips on our farm, food waste from ours and other restaurants. And so we're working with that company in project number 3 to build them a purpose-built facility for a mushroom farm. So they're going to be um, growing, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million a year in mushrooms, which is just crazy.
I know.
But mushrooms on a revenue per square foot basis are somewhere in the neighborhood of the Apple Store, which is just kind of mind
Blows your
blowing.
mind. Yeah, for sure. Are they using earthworms too? Are they doing a
No, they're
lot?
not.
They're not.
It's all like woody waste and food waste basically. They grind it together and they put it in a bag and then they pour mushroom spawn on it. They seal it up, let it colonize, cut a hole in the bag, the mushrooms pop out, they harvest it, the bag goes in the compost. That's it. That's the
That's
process.
awesome. That's
Now
really
it's I'm oversimplifying that, but that's like generally what it
yeah,
is. And
no.
if you've never been to
But
a mushroom farm, and I mean it looks like a warehouse with a whole bunch
yeah,
of shelves with bags sitting on them. That's it.
yeah,
You
I
know,
know.
it needs to
Great.
be kind of a controlled environment for certain stages of it, and you don't want to make sure that things like don't get contaminated. So
Mhm.
if for anyone who's like homebrewed beer, it's like I haven't, but I know that like decontaminating everything so that the fermentation process goes off without a hitch is like a really crucial aspect of it. And so that's very, very similar to mushroom farming. You don't want mold and other stuff kind of contaminating. And so that's what they do. And so, we're really excited about that as well, because it gives us really this like fully closed loop circular economy portfolio here where we grow food, serve food, reuse the waste to grow food, serve food, and reuse the
Yeah,
waste
yeah,
again.
that's right. Yeah,
And
that's cool.
so, waste products and outputs from one become inputs into another process. And, all the while, the hope is that the um, kind of the awareness and the buzz that we can build not only about our farming practices and, our other partners,
Mhm.
can is something that like people can learn and benefit from, but
Yep.
also that it can help to drive, more foot traffic into these businesses. I mean, that's the idea. So,
Yep.
whew, I'm out of breath.
Oh
That's the whole
man, it's
spiel.
such a cool conversation though, because I mean, there's whole sorts of IoT sensors around. If you're doing indoor farming like mushroom farming, there's whole sorts of things around the environments that you build and you have to protect, and it's really cool. It's really cool to see where it's going to go. And kind of the future is, because obviously farming has always been a hot topic because there's a lot of we have food shortages around the world, and US produces a lot of food, but we could do it so much more efficiently. That's a whole other
Hmm.
ball of wax other than prop tech, right? I mean, it's just but prop tech, if you do indoor farming, then there's going to be prop tech solutions for farming too, right? At some point there's so many things that happen inside a built environment that you could solve lots of problems with, right? For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of just depends on how do you want to define prop tech, and I feel like these days it's getting more and more expansive depending on
Oh,
how you
yeah.
want to qualify those land uses, right? So,
Yeah.
for instance, growing mushrooms puts off it puts off carbon dioxide as a waste product. Now, it's not
Hmm.
like driving an 18 wheeler, but
Right.
you're digesting organic matter, right? And so,
Yeah.
and there's new regulations in New York City that not the contents, but buildings themselves actually need to be, made where they mitigate their carbon footprint. And
Right.
so through my prop tech network, I know companies that are out there doing this, really aimed at building owners and operators to be compliant with this law. And that same technology then can sit on top of our HVAC system,
Right.
within this urban farm in order to suck up all of
Yes.
that CO2 before it ever hits the outside air. And
Exactly.
so there's just really, really cool things that cross my desk, and that like as long as I'm aware of them, I can identify opportunities to plug them into what I'm doing
Hmm.
and make them more efficient or more profitable or faster to execute, that sort of thing. So especially around like, I mentioned the construction technologies,
Hmm.
not only using um, you know, healthier and cleaner, bio-based materials, but also a lot of like offsite modular prefab, type approaches so that like these buildings, like when they're approved and they're ready to go, they go up really fast.
Like
That's
Legos.
that's the
Yes.
idea. Exactly.
Yeah. You want them to go
Exactly.
up like Legos. That's what we all want. Yeah, for sure. Or 3D print them like Icon's doing here in Austin, where they 3D print everything. It'd be great. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
would be nice for sure. It would be nice. I mean, well, the technology will get there. I think, housing shortage, building shortage, a lot of the stuff around construction and prop tech and all those great things will be solved by technology. I think the technology, it's, real estate. What do I claim it? They're bad as bankers almost. I mean, like it's such a old legacy kind of industry, and they haven't really embraced technology as they could have, but now they're kind of being forced to. So I think it's great for sure. I think it's,
Yeah, for sure.
wonderful thing. Well, this has been a really cool conversation, man. Is it like anything else you want to, like, all your wisdom around prop tech and stuff? What else do you think we need to focus on?
Great question. I mean, I think that there's always room for, interesting data tools and applications of data. Like I said, I'm a big fan of anything relating to location data, mobile or otherwise. And that could
Yeah.
be imagery analysis, all that sort of stuff. My head has been kind of deeply in that world for a long time.
Hmm.
But it depends on what the application is, right?
Yeah.
So I think that like that stuff is still got, plenty of room to run. Um, and then, I'm kind of most excited about kind of monitoring how the construction landscape is going to be changing over the next 10 years. And, to the extent that like we can find more efficient ways to build, I mean, I think that like it's going to be a game changer, and hopefully a lot of these policies and regulations around encouraging building and repurposing existing buildings and
Mhm.
transforming them into much needed housing can keep pace with our pending ability to actually deliver those housing units in an expedient way. So that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, this is so cool. This has been a great conversation. If anybody wants to find your restaurant or they want to find you, you're willing to offer that up to folks, how could they contact you?
LinkedIn is I'm not a social media person, but LinkedIn I guess kind of qualifies for that. So that's the easiest way to reach me. And you'll have my name, my spelling, and everything like that on the podcast. So
Yeah.
feel free to reach out. I'm happy to further the conversation.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks. This has been so cool. And I think you are episode number 4. So look at that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
make the top 3, but
You
I'll
didn't
take
make the
it.
top 3. It
One
was
out of the medal
scheduling.
winning.
It was a scheduling thing. But yeah, you're the top 10. Look at
Yeah,
that.
that's pretty good. I'll take it.
Very cool. This has been great. I appreciate you being on my show. It's been so good.
My pleasure. All right. Well, thanks, Amy. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
All right.